Welcome to the Innovators Playbook podcast. I am your host, Seth Narayanan, founder and CEO of Telient Systems. Each week, I'll be sitting down with entrepreneurs, product leaders, and technologists who are solving real world problems with bold ideas and smart execution. We will dig into what is working, what's not, and the lessons they have learned turning vision into reality. If you're leading digital transformation, scaling a startup, or just curious how innovation really happens behind the scenes, this is your playbook. Let's get started. Welcome, everyone, to the Innovators Playbook podcast. I'm your host, Seth Narayanan, founder and CEO of Telient Systems. I am very excited to have Rebecca Sutter join me in the podcast today. Rebecca is the Chief Technical Officer at National Institute of Automotive Service Excellence. She's a seasoned technology leader with a proven track record of transforming vision into results through innovative solutions and strategic execution. She has co-founded and founded multiple technology businesses. She has decades of experience driving revenue growth, digital transformation, and customer satisfaction. She has launched groundbreaking platforms that serve hundreds of thousands of users. Rebecca's career has been defined by aligning technology with business objectives to create scalable and user-focused solutions. She has expertise in AI, ML, cloud architecture, UI, UX design. Rebecca thrives at the intersection of technology and business strategy. And she's also passionate about mentoring and fostering next generation of tech innovators. Welcome, Rebecca, to the Innovators Playbook podcast.
Oh, thank you, Seth, for inviting me.
Why don't we get started today? You're deep in the world of technology and business leadership for a number of years. How did your journey start, and how did you get to your current role as CTO at ASE?
It was an accidental career. In high school, I got an internship with the U.S. Navy at the Naval Research Lab through serendipity mostly, but I also had acquired skills of my own in early microcomputers. And so I was in that internship for 5 years while I was studying computer science at University of Maryland. It was very formative. There were a lot of technological innovations starting at the time. Unix had just come out. The ARPANET was on the verge of becoming the internet. We had massively parallel machines coming up. I used to solve big data problems. It was almost a nexus of innovation all at the same time. I had a chance to participate as at least in the end user side, if not the person actually driving the innovation. I was exposed to it. That led on to running a small software company, then a series of consulting gigs that led to full-time jobs with nonprofits. It's always easier to get a paycheck than to make your own paycheck. And the hand-to-mouth existence of consulting and running a software company led me to stable employment. I then realized I needed to understand businesses better. So I went back and got a business degree, and that led to a 24-year role at a for-profit educational company where I progressed from an IT manager to essentially the COO. My title didn't really change all that much, but my responsibilities shifted massively during that career. That company was acquired by private equity, and that left me at loose ends. I started a small consultancy focused on education ed tech, and then attained a position as the CTO at ASE. The title, again, doesn't match my responsibilities. It's actually a dual CIO CTO type position. Most recently, to better understand people, I completed a master's in psychotherapy and an internship around it. I've managed to turn a series of opportunities into a career, and I have no regrets.
That is really cool. You've got everything. You've got experience and you have got educational chops to back it up, not just in computer science, but management and business and also psychotherapy. That's a lot. I didn't really plan to ask you this, but it did come up. It looks to me like you were one of the early entrants as a woman in the computer arena. How do you think people received you and perceived you? How much did it help? How much did it hurt? Would you mind talking about that a little bit?
Actually, I can't say I'm an early entrant. Grace Hopper beat me by
Oh,
several decades. Interestingly enough, I am glad you brought it up because most people don't focus on it. When I got into IT, it was much more even-handed. I would say roughly 50% of my peers were women, especially in the software engineering part. It was originally considered administrative work, secretarial work. And if you saw the movie Hidden Figures,
Mm,
that'll
yeah,
help you understand that context. The person who did all the programming for the Apollo missions was a woman, and she wrote many thousands of lines of
right.
code. And so I had a lot of role models. I received a lot of mentoring from women. A friend of mine's mother was a chief programmer at Prime Computing, which was
Part
one
of
of the
EDP.
small,
Yeah.
and she encouraged me. My parents both worked for IBM and they encouraged me. My path was not an uncommon path for young women who had the sort of technical acumen that I displayed at a pretty early age. I noticed, though, that a lot of my peers left the industry starting in the 90s. There was a big
Mhm.
shift in the people that were pursuing computer science degrees. I think it had a lot to do with the marketing around the early home computers and how it was focused on computers as for boys. And
Big
with
gaming as well.
gaming as well had a big impact, though I wrote a lot of computer games back in the day.
Okay.
I think that had a change in the dynamic, a profound change in the culture and the dynamic around IT. Unfortunately, it's become a boys' club. And so today, only roughly 9% of individuals in leadership roles are women. I
Mhm.
belong to a couple of organizations that are trying to address that, which is one of the reasons I've embarked on a lot of mentoring and trying to help grow the next generation of women leaders in IT.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Actually, my
Mhm.
wife, I met her when she worked for Burroughs Computers back in the
Mhm.
day. She like
Mhm.
was one of our early entrants, but you're right, there were a lot of women back
Mhm.
in those days. It has maybe taken a downturn, but hopefully he'll come back.
Mhm. There's a lot of institutional biases that work against it now, but I think we have a valuable contribution and perspective to bring to IT.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Talking about technology, there is a lot that's going on with AI
Mhm.
today, but beyond AI, what emerging technologies do you believe will have significant
Mhm.
impact in the next, say, 3 to 5 years?
Well, a CTO has to juggle keeping an eye on the big picture as well as what's going on within their institution. Sometimes it's easier to focus on one or the other. Actually, your question makes me think more broadly at what I'm reading and what I'm hearing from peers and conferences I go to. I think over the next few years, we're going to see quantum computing become a reality. That's going to have a big impact on any number of applications. It's going to change encryption, obviously, but it's also going to have a big impact on every industry. Problems that were previously insoluble just become much more pedestrian. I'm sure we're going to see 6G wireless networks over the coming years, which is going to push a lot of computing power to the edge of the network. Right now, a lot of stuff is centralized. I'm sure that's going to have an impact on how cloud computing is provisioned. Internet of Things applications, VR,
Mm.
augmented reality applications might improve dramatically. I don't know how that's all going to shape out, but I'm sure it's really going to have an impact. Speaking of AR and VR, we're also on the cusp of becoming much more practical, especially in education and in business, especially with the more common implementation of digital twins, being able to model things, whether it's traffic, logistics, processes,
Mm.
doing it digitally in parallel to the reality will allow it to be managed more easily. It's going to change a lot of supply chains and other things. We'll see also continuation of existing trends, better, faster, cheaper. And some in tech and information technology, probably over the next 3 to 5 years, will be even more pervasive than it is today. Many other applications. It's going to be AI enabled increasingly, which is going to have a big impact. If I could project all these things and guess, I'm vastly underpaid.
Yeah, you can guess, and sometimes hard to bet on it as to what's going
Mhm.
to win out in the end.
Exactly.
Yeah, right now electric cars are all the rage, but
Mhm.
at one point I was hoping that something like a hydrogen fuel cell or something like that would come through.
In the transportation industry that I'm part of at ASC, we hear a lot about how that's evolving. And I think there's a lot of competing visions there. You do hear hydrogen come up, you hear hybrids, you hear pure EVs. I'm sure battery technology is going to have a huge impact on that. Lately, I think perhaps AI enabled robots are going to have a huge impact on the manufacturing side and perhaps even the service side. Again, there's a lot of stakeholders that are working sometimes at cross purposes. Who knows what the market's going to choose as the winner at this
Yeah.
point?
A little aside, you mentioned that you are in the automotive industry, which is
Mhm.
true. I know your company or your institute is. I see it all the time when I go to service shops.
Thank you.
It's very,
You like that?
yeah, for those of you that don't know, can I give a
Mm,
little background about ACE and what you guys
Sure.
do?
So ASC was created in the early 1970s in response to initiatives within Congress to regulate how vehicle service is performed. There was a lot of outrage about how service was being provisioned. There was a sense that there was a lot of fraud and waste. People were being mischarged. There was no standard way of assessing the competency and ability of individuals performing auto repairs. Though they're typically called mechanics, but we refer to them as technicians. I got corrected on that on my first day in the job. No, there's no grease monkeys. They're all technicians and their environments are very well maintained. Actually, having visited some shops, yes, it's tremendously professionalized since then. I think in part because of our efforts. What we've done is created standards for determining the skill and efficacy of auto technicians. We do that through assessments, but our assessments are not technology agnostic, vendor agnostic.
Right.
If an individual passes one of our credential exams, and they're quite hard, I've taken one, it was quite hard, then they can be assured of being able to fix any type of vehicle from any type of make and model. And that's hard to do. In order to make sure that our credentials are valid and well recognized, they're also psychometrically created. That's also hard to do. So we partner with a variety of organizations to both on the consumer side as well as in the delivery of our credentials. We deliver hundreds of thousands a year. We are essentially unique. We're a nonprofit in a space that's not full of a lot of nonprofits. And we balance a lot of competing interests and stakeholders from auto dealers to the OEs, the equipment manufacturers, to people who make parts and tools. Our board is composed of all those different stakeholders. So it's a unique body. We're also a voluntary credential, which means we have to work hard to align the value of what we do with where the industry is going, as well as what technicians want.
Yeah, that's great. Whenever I see that sign, I do get a satisfaction that you're going to somebody that's professional and is not gonna do something that's gonna harm the car.
That's great to hear. That's awesome to hear.
And similarly, like in our business, we have certifications, and if you're a practitioner of Microsoft Azure, then you get a lot of credentials from Microsoft. Similarly, in QA and other areas, there are certifications. Not that is automatic, but that's a determinant that you understand the concepts and you have a certain level of professionalism about that. What kind of tools do you guys have? I know you have a testing platform, right? So is it all virtual or is there any in-class type education for this? How do
Well,
they train themselves to go through your certification?
we don't provide the education. We simply credential the people who have been educated, and we do it at two levels. We do it at a student level and at a professional level. We have credentials as well as certificates around specific technologies. At the student level, we have a sister organization called the ASE Education Foundation, and they manage an accreditation process where we accredit vocational and secondary schools, community colleges to teach auto tech.
Okay.
And they take a series of exams. Those exams frequently form the core of the curriculum, as well as the final exams for those curriculum. And people who take that course of training and pass our entry-level exams frequently have a leg up in becoming professionals. And in fact, we explicitly give the top performers one of our entry-level credentials on the professional side to help encourage them to take the leap into the professional space. We also work with some of the OEs, a lot of the companies that for-profit are companies, as well as their own individual training programs within the OEs to help conform their training programs to the industry-wide specs that we help define. We actually spend a great deal of time with our stakeholders, constantly aligning our credentials with what the current practice is. And we make a strong attempt to make certain we're fair and unbiased. It's as if we're offering a computer credential that encompasses not only Microsoft, but also Linux, as well as Salesforce, as well as any number of different platforms all at once. And providing something so cross-cutting means that we have to carefully weigh everybody's interests to make sure we're not favoring any one party. And so we don't provide the education specifically and intentionally. We stay out of the education side. We just credential individuals. And we provide over 50 professional certifications and dozens more other certificate programs around other specific technologies and vendors.
And your role as the Chief Technical Officer is to maintain the technology and the technical stack that you
Yeah.
use.
We rely a lot on various parties, and a lot of it is historical. I was the first person ever brought on board to manage technology at a high level within ASC. For most of the history of the organization, every group within ASC did its own thing. There was a series of contractors and individuals. And while I went in with the intention of trying to set a high level direction and move the company forward in terms of how it embraces and uses technology, as my boss said on my first day, I had to clean up on aisle 3, and I've been mainly spending a lot of my energies just trying to create some order out of what I inherited.
Yeah.
And that's been a lot of my writ since I got here. But ASC manages internally a portal with a backend that maintains a lot of information around our technicians and their credentials, if not all of it. We also have platforms for delivering certain parts of our services and goods. We also integrate with a lot of other parties to provide various parts of the credential or the assessment process. We do test center testing through Prometric,
Okay.
and we're starting to do remote proctored testing also through Prometric, though that may be evaluated and changed at some point.
Yeah.
As we're trying to keep up with industry trends. We have goals to embrace a lot of the trends in educational technology, and I've been a part of trying to identify what those are and try to create consensus within the organization about how to move forward.
Yeah, you probably partly answered that question, but what is your strategy to keep your tech stack modern? You're inheriting a lot of different ones, but do you have a program to modernize it and make it more state of the art?
We do. We have an overarching tech strategy, but a lot of it is around evolving our existing platforms to the point where we can break out of the monoliths we inherited and start creating something more modular and easier to manage. But in order to move that first or move that forward, we're hoping to implement an API first design in our new platforms,
Interesting.
embrace cloud native from day one and leverage managed services. And part of that is we're making a general migration to the Azure cloud environment. We try to focus on proven technologies and avoid bleeding edge stuff. So the front end, back end stacks, trying to use common technologies. Unfortunately, I inherited a lot of obscure older things. And so modernizing away from that has been hard. We are moving towards containerization and try to be vendor agnostic. And lastly, I think a big part of it is we're moving to a data first architecture. We're in the process of building a data lake and trying to consolidate all of our disparate data sources into one clean source of truth.
Okay.
That's been a major effort and a multi-year effort, I have to say.
Yeah.
Getting to the point where we could do it, much less actually embark on it, was non-trivial, as we like to say in IT.
Yeah, no, that all sounds really interesting. And it looks like you've got a good handle on it, or at least good direction kind of being set. So, where do you see innovation? I think you are an innovator by nature. You've done a lot. How do you keep innovation happening within your organization? And do you feel like it is also happening in the industry, in the automotive industry as a whole, and maybe the testing or credentialing industry?
That's a great question. And in my role, I have to live in the here and now as well as try to think about where things are going. And so I've spent a lot of time trying to understand the ed tech world in particular, because you have a tendency to get pigeonholed in whatever you're working on and not poke your head up to look at the big picture.
Yeah.
I think the big picture is credentialing and the assessment industry is going to move towards adaptive assessments. They have some principles now around linear on-the-fly testing and test pools, question pools, and there are evolutions of where we have been. And there is some effort that have been made in the past around adaptive assessments, which use a series of rules to try to identify how the test taker is doing and change themselves on the fly. I think AI is going to tremendously empower that. and also apply psychometric principles to that. The psychometric principles are around the idea that a test is both valid and reproducible. In other words, it can be taken over and over again and you have similar results, and that the answers are valid. That's hard to do except after the fact. But I think incorporating those types of computations on the fly and doing it continuously is going to have a huge impact on assessments.
Explain a little bit about what is psychometric testing mean.
Psychometrics. There's a field of psychology called psychometrics. And psychometrics is the idea that you can create an assessment which is valid. It could stand up in a court of law as something that you can point to and saying this is correct. Psychometrically bound tests have to, it's hard for me to reduce all of the technical terms around it to something that's a little more approachable for most people. But essentially, there's a lot of a multiple choice question can be a psychometrically bound question. But there's a lot of effort that's taken to evaluate how that question is asked and how it's answered and how people do on that question and whether the question can be asked in different ways to assure a similar result. And there's a lot of math that goes into that. And so psychometricians are PhD psychologists. They spend a lot of time designing these tests so that they're valid. And that validity is important for legal reasons. It's important for fairness. And it's important to assure competency that the person taking it, the answers are truly valid, not just random. And that has a huge impact on assessments, particularly high stakes assessments. So think about, say, the tests you need to take to get into graduate school, or the tests you need to take to complete some various credentials, like the bar exam, for example, to become a lawyer. Those tests have to be defensible. And to make them defensible, they have to be psychometrically bound. And there's a whole set of institutions around creating those standards and enforcing those standards and assuring that credentials meet those standards. And so adaptive assessments have been on the horizon for a long time, but I think they were bound by the reality of what IT could do for a long time. But I think AI is going to change that.
You kind of brought the next topic I was going to ask you about. Yeah, so talk about AI will impact that and other things in your industry.
Within the industry, I can probably speak a little more to the industry. AI is going to have a huge impact in the sense that I can't really predict it. I think it's going to change the way we proctor tests. I think it's going to change the way we get insights into the information that students provide us. I think it'll allow us to move to continuous competency validation. We will probably see blockchain credentialing because of it, where someone's credentials will be stored in an immutable way where they can easily be shared from organization to organization. There's a lot of friction points around education as how information is stored, how it's shared, how it's validated. And I think technology is going to mitigate a lot of that. And it's probably in the future, legalities permitting, will allow competency-based hiring and integration with HR systems, maybe lifetime personalized learning pathways. We need to harmonize global standards in order to facilitate a lot of this, which is a huge political lift, I think.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I can't say with any certainty where that's going to go, but the potential is everybody will have more control over their educational pathway, and those credentials will be more closely related to competency and not passing specific tests, demonstrated competency. And that's going to have a huge impact on how people they're employed, how they prove themselves in the future. In a sense, it's going to make it a harder world. God help our children.
Yeah, both
but
hard and easy, right? There are things that are hard today might be easy, but maybe
exactly.
Yeah.
It'll be fairer in some ways, though. I think there's a lot of what we see is there's a lot of bias at various points in the process, and I think it's going to remove a lot of that bias.
Yeah, but in terms of using AI, I know you talked about how AI can impact your industry, but within the software engineering side, are you starting to use AI for software development and QA and those kinds of things in your organization?
We are. I've been focused on trying to find practical use cases both for the IT organization as well as the rest of the organization. And within the IT function, we have been using it modestly in software development. Most recently, we just started a reevaluation of the current round of tools. There's a number of different IDEs that have come out recently that incorporate AI and other tools. And I've tasked my developers with personally assessing and weighing them towards a consensus choice. We've also started investigating using it for QA, and we actually licensed a tool to experiment with it. We do some automated QA now, but it uses scripting and it's not AI driven. And so we've started investigating an AI driven tool that shows a lot of promise, but it needs a lot more evolution before it's ready for prime time.
Yeah, a couple of tools. I don't know if you've heard of it or if you have tried that, but that's been highly recommended by a few of my customers that use it. And yeah, it's really QA and automating the scripting. There are a lot of tools coming out there. Definitely.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We'd like to automate more because DevOps really relies on a tightly integrated test cycle, and building out that testing framework is really expensive and time consuming.
Yeah.
And so if you can have an AI driven testing tool, QA tool, where you don't have to script everything out, then that could really cut the cost of implementing a DevOps pipeline a lot, make it a lot lower. Right now, we're more adhering to an agile process with defined QA test points. We've also tried to identify use cases outside of IT. Customer service is using it in some ways. We have an AI agent answering questions quite well. We've used it for data analysis. We've experimented with using it with test item development. We have to do these SMEs, subject matter expert driven workshops to generate new test content. That's quite an expensive proposition. Our cost per test item is quite large, and AI has the potential to reduce that fairly substantially. And so we've investigated a variety of approaches to that. And then also the normal use cases inside for search and reports and that sort of thing.
Cool.
And we build our own AI agents, mainly using off-the-shelf tools, but otherwise we've used public LLMs in some cases. And lastly, we've been evaluating AI-assisted proctoring solutions because we really do want to move to providing much more broadly remote proctored solutions for our credential assessments. It's what our market wants, and we think it's where we want to go in the short term. So we've spent a huge amount of effort lately around that.
So currently they're using like Prometric or one of their test centers to do it, and you can do it remotely from your cloud server.
Yeah. We've been using human proctors. We use their ProProctor solution, which largely relies on human proctors, but the issue there has been the inconsistency of the experience. And also some of the process is sometimes not consistent. We're hoping that an AI proctored solution or an AI-enabled hybrid solution will offer more consistency and a better customer experience. And that's what we're moving to, hopefully in the next year or so.
Very cool. So let's move to leadership and team management. You've been a leader for a long period, and you've managed teams, various sizes and types. What is your philosophy around team management and people management, and how do you create a culture of learning and within your organization and within your teams?
You got an hour to talk about that? That's a big subject.
I know.
I have a lot of strong opinions on that too.
I would love to hear that. Yeah.
Yeah, I started as an individual contributor, and one of the reasons I pursued area education at various points is I wanted to become much more effective at either managing people or aligning what I did with the business or serving our customers. And so that forced me to understand first the business and then people a lot better. I have a variety of focus points for leadership for me. And number one is embracing continuous learning, and not just within your field, but outside of your field. I think a lot of our growth comes from doing things that challenge us, things that we're uncomfortable with doing. And when I started in this field, I was very much an introvert. You could not pay me to talk to people if my life depended on it. And I think embracing the ability to communicate and then putting myself in the role of translating business requirements to technology. And then also advocating for my team in the business context has forced me personally to grow by taking in things outside of IT. So it's not just the certifications and even the management theory. It's very important to try to broaden yourself, to assess your own weaknesses and learn how to overcome and compensate for them. I also try to prioritize people over process. Technology is never just about technology. In the way I put it, every problem is a people problem. I think, and whenever you're designing anything, you have to consider the human impact first. Don't automate for the sake of efficiency. Focus your automation on empowerment. And that has the effect of reducing the resistance to automation. And now there's not as much resistance now, but early in my career, there was a tremendous amount of resistance to using computers. Computers were perceived as a solution for accounting and manufacturing, but not something that, for the broader business. And so that forced me to think about how people view computers and how people use computers. And I think a lot of technologists had the conceit that a computer can solve every problem.
Yeah.
And I think that we have to move away from that and really incorporate a need to build psychological safety. And that's the third thing. People thrive when they feel secure enough to take risks, fail, and try again. And that's something that's hard to acculturate. And part of that is just style. Part of that is actual intentional actions. Part of it is communication. Try to communicate that failure is a step in the learning process rather than a career-ending mistake. And I think in some organizations that's easier to do than others. There are some places you need a fall guy
Yeah.
because they expect a fall guy.
Yeah. That's a great point because somebody told me, how do you know you're innovating or how do you know you're not innovating is you're not failing, right? So if you're not failing enough, then it means you're not pushing the boundaries of what you can do.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the other thing, I have two other points to make it real quick. One is team stability. I think a lot of organizations have high turnover, and that turnover impacts morale, institutional knowledge, project continuity. I think focusing on individualized growth paths and not discarding underperformers, but understanding why they're underperforming and work to set them up for success is important. And lastly, staying curious and humble. Expertise is valuable, but it's not infallible. And approach everything with curiosity. Ask more questions than you answer. And if you don't understand something, don't be afraid to show your lack of understanding and to try to get someone else to correct it for you. And we sometimes have big egos in tech. We think we're gods in a sense, but staying humble and recognizing your boundaries and your limits, I think, is important.
Yeah. I think you may have answered this, but do you deal with your team members based on what you think, or do you modulate the way you interact with a team member based on what you think their strengths, weaknesses, and their unique capabilities are? Or do you think that in order to be fair, you got to have a common standard across everyone?
Oh, that's a great question. In my current context, I'm really focused on team building as well as creating individual opportunities for growth. And I think what that has meant in my specific context is I try to get an appreciation from the start about what a person's individual needs are, where they want to go in their career, and just help them achieve that, create a growth plan for them, and try to align it as much as possible with the business needs. And that's easier said than done because sometimes somebody wants to go down a particular path and you just can't go there because you don't have the resources or the time, or there's no project that's going to develop that skill. You have to put people on a different path sometimes. I try to lead with the idea when I start working with somebody with a degree of honesty and transparency. I don't expect loyalty and for people to be pigeonholed. I try to convey that I'm going to cheerlead their success, even if it means they move on to bigger and better things. And then I try to ask them what they need to grow to the next level in this job. And that's worked out rather well by paying attention to what individuals need you're much more likely to create stability as well as to create a degree of alignment between the business and the individual.
Yeah, yeah. At the end of the day, I think this whole topic is, I think, evolved, and there is consensus
Mm,
that there
mm,
are sometimes situations that where there is a fit and there is
mhm,
no fit. And like Netflix, they have this philosophy that if you're not a fit, it's not you,
mhm.
it's not them, it's not a
Mm,
fit. And I would
mm,
rather find that out sooner than later and give them
mm,
a generous kind of an exit that, hey, go find
mm,
something that is a fit for you, and
mhm.
we don't have to suffer through this, right?
Oh, I agree. I agree completely. I think 90% of personnel issues are because the right person is not in the right position.
Yeah.
And if you find that fit right from the outset, you're going to solve so many of your problems. And to do
Mhm.
that, I largely had to bypass HR departments and do a lot of my own hiring
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
also pay a lot of attention to onboarding. Onboarding needs to give people situational awareness from the outset,
Yeah.
help create the connections they need to do their jobs,
Yeah.
and tailored to what kind of job they're doing.
Yeah.
And it's a process that you have to manage and evaluate and improve. It's not just something you can say, go talk to these three people, and then here's your workstation and let me know if you have any problems. It has to be something very intentional
Hmm.
and reproducible.
Yeah. Yeah. No,
Mm,
you're so right. Hiring is the
mm,
most important job. And I
mm.
know this is a topic that we could talk for a long time, but I think
We
that,
could.
yeah, I've had a lot of people over the years, and it's
Mm,
not an exact science, right? It's almost like testing, right? So you need to put that
mhm,
person in that role to find out
mhm,
if they're a fit or not. So you can try to do a lot to kind of
mm,
catch that early,
mm.
but it's difficult.
And avoid the sunk cost fallacy. We have a tendency to continue investing even when it's not proving to be a good investment. And so I've occasionally shifted people around from role to find the right role for them. Sometimes that's worked out, sometimes it's not. But I try to avoid giving up on people. If a person got through the interview process and it's not easy, there should be somebody I'm willing to spend time and energy to make sure that they're a good fit.
Well said. Yeah. And just from an innovations perspective, can you
Mm, mm.
share any recent bold idea that you or your team have tried that whether it worked or not, or something like
Um,
that?
I don't know. We're pursuing a lot of bold ideas right now. As I said, a lot of my energy the first 2 or 3 years in this role was focusing on cleaning up a lot of problems. In the last year or so, we've started a bunch of new initiatives, and the jury's still out, and most of them are in process.
Yeah.
I have learned a few things though. My prior position was with a for-profit organization. For-profit organizations are very different than nonprofit organizations. And as a nonprofit organization, we have to view every problem through the lens of how we serve our stakeholders. And financial considerations, while they're important, don't drive everything. While for-profit organizations, the bottom line is king.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of the things we're working through are going to ultimately provide value. And that value has to be in very simple terms. It's either has to make the organization more agile, more responsive, produce better outcomes, or save money. And so that's typically how I try to evaluate those final outcomes, everything we pursue. And then just in my particular role has been how to align the technical objectives with the political realities of a nonprofit.
Yeah.
So
That's very unique. I've never been in a nonprofit, but I can imagine the pressures are different.
it's a very different ballgame. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's not the same thing.
Yeah. Thank you so much for everything you have shared so far. One final
Sure.
request or question is, what advice
Mm,
would you give? You've been around for a long time and you've seen a lot of different
mm,
things. So what is the advice you would give for
mm.
somebody coming out of college that you would mentor and you would give direction to in this technology world?
I keep trying to find somebody to replace me. I'm not going to be around forever. But nobody wants my job. I don't understand why. It's a great job. I think that if I were to mentor somebody, there's a few things I think are important. One is always centering people and their needs. And that's why I became a psychotherapist, is to better understand people and their needs. A lot of resistance, a lot of problems around adoption, a lot of the disconnect that the IT department has with the organization boils down to not getting that right. Another thing is to stay close to your users. Don't be afraid to talk to them about any and everything. Validate your assumptions early and often. Don't do things in a vacuum. Three is to understand that resistance isn't necessarily the sign you're doing something wrong. Usually it's a sign you're ahead of the curve. People have not quite caught up with where you're
Yep.
trying to go.
Yep.
But make sure you're solving a real business problem and not just something that's new. Just because you can do it doesn't mean you should do it.
Yep.
And that's something that we all struggle with sometimes. I don't know how many business models came up in the dot-com era that were just totally half-baked because somebody said, we can do this with the internet, so we should.
Like the web van.
Yeah, exactly. Innovation that sticks is useful, measurable, and tied to outcomes people care about. And I think that needs to be constantly reinforced with technologists because we like to solve every problem with a computer. And then lastly, try to stay grounded. Vision is a compass, but adaptability is what gets us from here to there.
Yeah, love it.
So that's the advice I give. I know a lot of that's just amorphous general business school advice, but I think some of the core principles of what we do are really business principles, and it's just a technology context.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you, Rebecca.
Thank you,
This was,
Seth. It was
this
really nice
was very
speaking with you.
enjoyable, and you've got a lot of things to share, and you did, and really appreciate it. I'm glad we were able to get you on today. Thank you so much
Well,
for being
I
on the
appreciate the
podcast.
chance.
Yeah, thanks,
You
Rebecca.
have a great day.